Brothers and sisters, listen closely. They thought they could silence me with paper. 12 pages of instructions, typed by hands I have never shaken, signed by no one brave enough to attach their name. 12 pages of surrender. 12 pages of humiliation dressed up as diplomacy. They told me, read it, President Traoré. Keep your head down. Don't resist. This is how you protect partnerships. This is how you survive. But tell me, since when did survival mean silence? Since when did dignity mean obedience? I was not chosen by my people to bow my head. I was not sent to the United Nations to parrot the words of strangers. I came to speak with my own voice, the voice of a continent silenced for over 400 years. And I swear to you now, no piece of paper, no foreign power, no threat of sanctions will ever erase that voice. So I folded their script in half, and when I walked up to that microphone, I carried not their words but mine. Words that shook the chamber, words they never prepared for. It all began 2 months earlier, when I gave a speech they called dangerous. A speech where I said what so many are too afraid to say, that the bombs falling on Gaza were not defense, they were destruction. That the mothers in Palestine who cry for their children sound no different from the mothers in Mali, in Niger, in Congo. And that if Africa remains silent in the face of such cruelty, then Africa is complicit. That truth was too much for them. Within days, I received a letter from the Secretary General's office. It accused me of undermining peace, of creating diplomatic tension. But make no mistake, they didn't want clarification. They wanted confession. They wanted me on my knees. The pressure followed like shadows. Calls from Paris, whispers from Washington, messages from Tel Aviv. Some tried sweet words. We can reconsider aid. We can increase development projects. Just walk it back. Others use threats. Sanctions are possible. Isolation is possible. Do you want your country to suffer for your words? And then came the insult. A drafted speech. 4 pages apologizing for tone. 3 pages apologizing for language. 5 pages reaffirming shared values. Shared values? Whose values? Since when did African dignity mean silence in the face of genocide? I could have refused to travel. I could have stayed home and let them think they won. But I knew this was bigger than me. If I refused to show up, they would rewrite the story. Traoré backed down. Traoré surrendered. So I boarded that plane to New York with no apology, no script, and no intention of bowing. But before that, something happened. 3 nights before my flight at 2 a.m., my private phone rang. Only 5 people in this world have that number. A stranger's voice introduced himself as Ambassador Richardson from the U.S. State Department. 20 minutes later, a black SUV without flags arrived at my palace. No plates, no warning. Richardson entered my office with 2 silent men. He opened a leather case and laid documents across my desk. Satellite photos of our gold mines, secret reports of our deals with China, records of Russian agricultural experts helping us rebuild. He leaned forward and whispered, "We know everything. And right now we're calling it cooperation. But we could call it something else." I looked him in the eyes. "And what do you think it really is, Ambassador?" He replied, "The beginning of something that could make your country very uncomfortable." He wasn't lying. For 6 months, we had been rewriting every relationship. Chinese engineers were building our networks. Russian advisors were improving our farms. Iranian doctors were preparing new hospitals. Not because we hated the West, but because we refused to live as dependents forever. Dependency is slavery disguised as assistance. Richardson tapped my desk. "Your UN speech doesn't have to be confrontational. Make your point, but do not burn bridges." I smiled. "Ambassador, when America invaded Iraq, did you apologize to the UN first?" He shifted. "That's different. When France sent troops into Mali, did they ask Africans for permission? The situations aren't comparable. When Israel bombed Palestinian schools, did they draft apology letters?" He closed the case. "I hope you make the smart choice." But I had already made my choice. The next day, I ordered my intelligence chief to leak a story that I was reconsidering, that I might soften my message. Western embassies celebrated, congratulating themselves for taming me. CNN ran headlines. BBC quoted sources. Washington sent cables boasting that the pressure was working. But while they celebrated, I stood in Revolution Square, speaking before 50,000 Burkina citizens. They think Africa will apologize, I told the crowd. They think Africa will beg. But when I go to New York, I will not be apologizing for dignity. I will be carrying your voices. The roar that followed could be heard for miles. Old women wept. Children clapped, though they barely understood. Young men beat drums like war had already begun. 2 days later, I landed in New York, and to my surprise, I was met not by protesters, but by hundreds of Africans living in the diaspora. They waved flags, they shouted, "Make them hear us!" A young woman ran alongside my car, shouting until her voice broke. That's when I knew this wasn't about one country anymore. It was about every African who had ever been told to kneel. When I entered the UN chamber, the air was thick. Delegates sat stiff, pens poised. Some smirked, expecting a climb down. Others whispered, expecting silence. Cameras zoomed in on my face, waiting to see if Africa would bend. I began simply, "Before you demand my apology, let me ask you something. Has Belgium apologized for Congo? Has France apologized for Algeria? Has Israel apologized for training militias in Africa? Has America apologized for slavery?" The silence was deafening. I pressed on. "You call me hateful for speaking truth. But when bombs flatten Gaza, you call it defense. When your policies starve African children, you call it economics. When Africa rises, you call it instability. Number, we are not the problem, we are the solution you fear." The French delegate walked out. Others avoided my eyes. I read aloud a message from a Burkina schoolgirl. "President, don't let them make you small. We are proud." I held up my phone and said, "That child has more dignity than this entire assembly." Then I declared, "I will apologize, but only for one thing. I apologize that it took this long for an African leader to speak freely here. I apologize that our children grew up thinking foreign approval was a requirement for dreaming, but I will never apologize for demanding respect. I will never apologize for being African." The hall froze. Not applause, not protests, just silence. The silence of power, realizing it has been challenged and cannot answer. That night, African ambassadors gathered in a back room. For the first time in decades, they weren't begging for aid. They were drafting a declaration. No more conditional aid, no more apologies, no more surrender. By morning, 12 presidents had signed. By the end of the week, African youth were organizing marches, Caribbean leaders were quoting my speech, and murals were rising in Harlem, Nairobi, Johannesburg. 3 words, no apology given. The retaliation came quick. Frozen aid, canceled loans, smear campaigns calling me reckless. But something had changed. Because while they froze funds, Africans unfroze their courage. In Kenya, students boycotted companies funding occupation. In Nigeria, markets refused to sell goods below value. In South Africa, teenagers filmed themselves declaring, "We don't beg anymore." Their videos reached millions. The West thought they had isolated us. Instead, they had united us. Within months, Zambia renegotiated mining contracts. Tanzania restructured resource ownership. Senegal gave France 90 days to leave their bases. Across Africa, leaders began finding their voices, and for the first time, the world began listening. 6 months later, Burkina Faso achieved something historic: food security. No aid, no UN programs, only Burkina farmers, Burkina methods, Burkina pride. The same techniques colonial experts had dismissed as primitive doubled our harvest. The same seeds they told us to abandon saved us from famine. The same soil they called barren proved fertile when freed from dependency. By the 1-year anniversary, the change was undeniable. Trade agreements rewritten, sovereign wealth funds established, universities filled with new students of science and engineering. A continent once told to apologize for its existence, now building a future without permission. And it spread beyond Africa. In Haiti, leaders declared independence from World Bank dictates. In Jamaica, radio stations played my speech in full. In Australia, Aboriginal activists cited it in land rights struggles. Across the world, the message had become a movement. Dignity is not negotiable. Brothers and sisters, this is why they feared my words. Because they were not just mine, they were ours. And now millions have remembered what they always knew. We have nothing to apologize for. Not yesterday, not today, not tomorrow. The apology they demanded will never come, because Africa has no apologies left to give.